Всем привет, это проект Альфа.
Hello everybody, this is Project Alpha. My name is Nikolai Feldman and you are watching live War Diary with Arestovich. Alexey, hello, thanks for joining us. Good evening everybody. So I do suggest us to start with discussing the victory plan of Volodymyr Zelensky, who is presenting it in the United States. This week there's a big international visit happening. You're probably keeping an eye on that, and there are a lot of publications and media that have already disclosed a lot of details, what president is going to do, how is he going to present this plan to Trump, to Harris, his meeting with Biden, and his statements about probable invitation to NATO from Biden, different insights, different estimations. What are you expecting from this visit? What will be a good result in your mind? A good result would be, how would I put it delicately, a developed joint decision about ending of this war. But being even more delicate today, I guess I'll have to be on top of my delicate game. The opinions of both sides are drastically different about whether the war should be over and how it should be over. And therefore, those who propose a plan of war, they, and I'll again be very delicate here, it will not be easy for them. But they'll be trying, as it is announced everywhere. We'll see what it ends up being. I want to start from the get-go. I'm an absolute skeptic about invitation to NATO, invitation to European Union for Ukraine. These voices have already been sounded, yes, but I'm also skeptical about the time frame that this plan has, in that peace plan, or however they call it, because this plan doesn't really talk about peace except for enforcing Russia to peace and some geopolitical steps, like invitation of Ukraine to NATO and using long-range missiles on Russian territory, using Western arms to do that. And this is a very brief plan. This is only for a couple months. It is very obvious why, because the border factor for this plan is presidential elections in the United States. And I think everybody, even those mysterious few who devised that plan, they have already understood that everything will change, regardless whether it's Democrats or Trump who prevails during the elections. One way or another, the history of previous relations with the West is going to be over for Ukraine. These relations will be changing, and they will be changing in the direction of roughly, we don't have money for war, but we have money for after-war rebuilding and reconstruction. This is one. Second, to destroy Russian Federation in the shortest possible time frame, or to convince it in perspectiveless or lack of perspectives for this continuation of war, also looks very iffy for me. Imagine that we, as a result of this meeting, got a permission to hit Russian territory with longer-range missiles, and we start destroying their warehouses. By the way, this week there were two very successful operations, really good successes on our side. It has to be praised. But we started destroying their airfields, logistics, outposts, command outposts, military infrastructure. What will happen? First casualty of that approach and these missile strikes would be Putin's ego. Second, of course, we will cause probably irreparable damage to their military infrastructure. Third, of course, morale of their troops and military political leadership would go down, as well as probably there'll be some questions from the society at large in Russia to Putin about the plan of war. Is he going to do anything? Is he going to defend the country? But will it force him to stop the war? It's hard to tell, Alexey. Maybe not. I think no, for one simple reason. He has the advantage on the front. And it is not the advantage that he had for 2.5 years, ballpark. But this is situational advantage. But long-term strategic situational advantage related to very troublesome mobilization results in Ukraine, the amount of aid that we've been getting, the dwindling amount of aid we've been getting from the West. So Russia is exploiting these advantages. Now, if I would be conducting or creating this plan of war, I, first of all, would have brought to the United States fundamental changes, the plan of changes in our military, and would demonstrate the seriousness of our intentions, because our top military leadership is acting with utmost inefficiency. And in the next few weeks, we might witness the loss of Vuhledar, Kupiansk-Uzlovoy territory, at least, because situations as they're unfolding there, it's crumbling. Kurakhova and Toretsk will also be part of that. So roughly at about 3 parts of the front, our troops would have to withdraw, and the enemy would advance rather notably. And with all difficulties that the Russian army is facing in Ukraine, they do have advantage, and they're generally pressing us, and we are crumbling, and we can collapse even further if that will continue. We've talked about that ad nauseum for 1,000 times, but again, being systemic in what we're analyzing today, let's mention that again. First is lack of fortifications. We don't have them. Mariana Bezuglaya went to the front recently and said that we don't have any, and they're not even in the plan. And this problem was not solved in 2.5 years of war. When people are talking about authoritarian regime of Zelensky, one needs to put a correction here. It's very authoritarian where it shouldn't be, and very not authoritarian where it should be. Now, second point, pointless zoo with reappointment and removal of brigade commanders. Bezuglaya was describing one of them when 72nd Brigade could not rotate for whatever reason. They removed the commander of this brigade and put a new one who was not much aware of the situation. And a typical situation in our front is when the brigade commander would be removed after a loss of a very simple position worth of maybe 2 fighters, and the old one is removed, the new one is appointed in his stead. New one doesn't have time to get in the fray of things, understand whom is he working with, what's his team like, understand the strengths and weaknesses, understand the front, understand his resources, everything that he has. And then he's removed again because another platoon position was lost. So this is a mass rotation of commanders in brigades, which doesn't do any good. And we, first of all, are not building the higher level of command above brigade level, but we're also dismantling the effective brigade command. Third, brigades are being torn apart. Recently, it leaked in the media, even the 3rd Storm Brigade was torn apart, which was resisting that since the beginning of war. Azov was split, they were split, and it was done under the guise of military needs and plugging the holes in the front, but that leads to lessening of the effectiveness of these brigades when they're not used as a single force, when they're dismantled into companies, into battalions, etc. Next, mobilized are prepared and used ineffectively. They're being thrown into new brigades which have no experience, no established, well-polished, well-functioning command. And people surrender. That's what we're seeing on the front. There are people who are surrendering on the front. There are people who are leaving their positions en masse when they don't even resist. Today, I'm not going to say where, but there was a case when one platoon of Russian fighters took 3 positions of our platoons. 4 drops from UAVs, and poorly trained, poorly commanded troops got out of trenches and raised their hands. There was not a single shot fired, just 4 drops from the UAVs, and that's a position of 150 yards of the front. And that's a typical one. And the worst thing is also the endless stream of lies from the bottom up. Company commanders, brigade commanders are lying to the central command. In many places, except for probably 2 locations, 2 operative tactical command districts, on all the other parts of the front, they distort the information. And the system of relations between brigade commanders, battalion commanders with operative tactical command center is such that if they lose a platoon position, they get a command back, return the control of that. And if they refuse or cannot, then they get a commission sent over to verify what happened, and as a result of this verification investigation, the commander is removed. So the army is not given a chance to fight. They very often remove commanders who are, at many cases, are mediocre, but they didn't have chance to even present themselves, and sometimes they remove even good ones. And General Command is barely understanding the conditions under which the military on the front are making their decisions. Civilians also have a lack of understanding of how it works. But the main thing, the chain link, the control link between the General Command, Supreme Command, and command on the front is being cut. And now it's basically a flow of lies coming from the front to the top, and barking from the top, don't care, don't know, just restore the position as you had it. To sum it up, we need to withdraw our army from the positions we're holding now to prepared positions, to more advantageous parts, and outline of the front. We need to diminish the amount of territory we are, the length of the front we're covering. We need to use geography to our advantage. We need to make sure that new brigades are not being sent to the meat grinder. They need to be put into the quieter parts of the front, or at least to have some reliable and expert brigades next to them so they can help them. Here and there on the front you can see small cauldrons where one brigade is still holding their positions, but two newer brigades on the right and the left, they have already fled. And that new cauldron is cropping up as Russians are moving on the flanks. We need to also cleanse the generality of Ukraine military, because if we're looking at the progression of the war, one can say that whoever is commanding during the last 6 months at least is causing a lot more damage than success to our front. And it is turning into the paper formalism without real genuine desire to understand things. And given the failing mobilization, this is a sum of factors that is about to collapse our front. In an obvious way, our Ukraine leadership in its current state and military leadership, they're incapable of solving the task of intensifying the quality, increasing the quality of command of our troops. And our patriotic circles in the country have an opinion that if we fix 1, 2, or 3 things, we will not only be successful in defending our territory, but we'll also take it back. This is a mistake. I don't know how much more blood they need to spill for them to understand that localized successes in their brigade and battalion, where everything is all right, at least maybe not all right, but better than in the other parts of the front, they cannot scale it to the whole front, to the whole country. Because it is the current state of social economic system of Ukraine. It is the current state of people on those parts of the front where things are crumbling. And it took us 33 years to get there, so at very best we'll need half of that time to fix things. We can do some things. We can notably increase certain parameters, but this will not happen due to subjective and objective reasons, and they should not be expecting miracles, because I think political leadership is incapable of judging what's happening on the front to a high degree of truth. And generals, in their endless lies, however you spell that, conjugate this verb now, but they're giving a very faulty picture to both. They're giving faulty command to the front, and they're giving faulty picture to the president. And they're lying about the perspectives as well. Just a little more, that factor if plays, we will win, we will do that. And therefore, I suggest, and I'm speaking out loud, you guys up top in Ukraine figure it out yourself, but I would suggest you drop all illusions that we can rebuild the military system during the war. We can't. We objectively could not. 2.5 years. We need a pause, a ceasefire, if you want, that would allow us to rebuild military-industrial complex and the system of defense. Maybe not even will change it, but at least will give us a chance to do that. But in order to utilize this chance, we'll need to bring more people, more talented people to power who can probably do that. I perhaps believe in a ceasefire, in some peace time in the next few years, but I am still very skeptical about us being able to rebuild the system. We'll have to work with objective factors, but at least we will have a chance if there is a ceasefire. That's why I'm seeing that the front will start crumbling more in a short time frame, and what we're observing near Pokrovsk, we'll start seeing more and more. By the way, Pokrovsk is also not a good part of the front. The enemy continues to advance. So that's the story. And if I was going to United States with a plan of peace or plan of victory, I would have brought to Washington first the plans to fundamentally change our armed forces. When we change motivation, we change how we draft people, we dismantle the general mafia. There are good generals. I'm not going to name them because I don't want to put them in an uncomfortable position right now. And the army knows them. And we need to conduct fundamental cadre changes, make sure we have good lifts, good elevators to help those who have proven that they're capable to solve tasks that are being put in front of them. We need fundamental changes. We shouldn't be just doing some popular changes, but doing systemic changes. And it's difficult. It's a long process. That's why when I started talking about collapse a year ago, nobody believed that. Now they're thinking about it. They're seeing that this is what's happening. So we'll see what happens. How far will they think? That's why, of course, if we get permission to use long-range missiles on their territory, and that's very uncomfortable for them, that's why they're threatening nuclear war, and they're trying to brandish what they can to prevent it. But this is not a factor that will solve everything. Everybody is asking a question, whomever you talk to. They ask a question, why would Putin stop a war then? And I've spoken about that before. The game is being played not in the space that we think it is in Ukraine. Our propagandist media is telling us that, roughly, that Russia is Dugin, who wants to destroy the West and all should be wearing Russian dress and playing balalaikas. And Dugin, of course, wants all that to happen. But except for Dugin, there are two more people who are making real decisions up in the Russian top. And these people see a very sharp picture that in the world, there is an ongoing big trade, and major 5 players are United States, Britain, Europe, representing the West. In many things they're joint, but there are still 3 parties. Then there are Turkish states, which start to integrate, which start to develop their own politics, and they'll be a playing factor in the 21st century. India, another factor, China, and Russia. Of course, there are countries of Africa, countries of South America, and giants like Malaysia and Indonesia. Those are still growing, but that's another story. So the main trade is going on the line China, India, and the West. Now, where will Russia be in that equation? Will they be attacking West? Russia has a very unique influence on India. 54% of Indian military are armed with Russian arms, and they have traditionally good relations between these two. So the West really needs Russia into its qualities. First of all, they want Russia to hold China, because Russia is also not a friend of China. Both sides are aware of that. And Russia is also a serious moderator in negotiations with India. In this quality, Russia is of much more interest to the West than as an object to be destroyed and to be won over. And for sure, to Putin and his immediate inner circles is much more interesting to be a moderator, to be trading in global things with India, China, and the United States than continue hitting their head on the gates of the West, while China is picking up whatever is left of you in Central Asia and the Far East, and you'll be losing India as a result of stupidity. So that's why the juxtaposition is different. Between China and Russia, they're doing negotiations for a long time. United States is also an active member. And the United States and Russia are following the rules that they've established for these negotiations. And they will be trading the influence on India and ability to resist China. The real danger for India is growing strength of the Turkish world, which again is a different obstacle. It's not. It's a different task. It's not going to Lvov and capturing Ukraine. So the relations with Great Tehran, as it is also known, the Turkish-speaking peoples, that's also another aspect. And that's why Russia is a natural ally for the West in a lot of these matters. So if we will continue thinking in the framework of our propaganda without understanding what is happening in the world, our prognosis becomes even more unfavorable. Me personally, summing it up, it's very curious for me to see how they will be solving the problem that the peace plan will either not be accepted or will be accepted with a few corrections that actually will devoid it of substance. And they will still have to present that this visit was a success, because, Zelensky's visit cannot be not a success, right, in our media. So it's curious, but I want to say that our wants will not be fulfilled, at least because we are not demonstrating real steps to change our military to become more effective. Because our military is in horrible state right now. It's basically a catastrophe what is happening there. National Guard, by the way, does not allow to tear their brigades apart, and they're fighting better, and they have fewer losses, and they have better results. This is literally just a military armed forces of Ukraine story. So look, Alexey, I'm talking about a successful result, specifically, on purpose, of President Zelensky's visit, because in previous paradigm that we've discussed, this visit should not even be successful, because I think one of the previous streams you mentioned, or actually several times, that overall President Zelensky is preparing an information story within which the West will be accused that the victory plan was not supported, was not to be realized, the West refused to support it, so he would need to present the result of this visit as unsuccessful in this case. Am I correct in this understanding? Okay, Nikolai, I did not say that he will do exactly that. I said this is one of the forking options as the result of it. I'm trying to present options for the future because I'm not a propaganda. Propaganda is the one that creates a picture that has no alternative. I'm making a point to show optional alternatives. This is one of the branches because the overall loss in this war needs to be assigned to somebody as a guilt, and the West is a good candidate for it. And I don't know how exactly the logic of these people working now, but I know the ballpark work of these people who support Zelensky. I know that they will have to show that this plan, this visit was a success, but this is an interesting task for them to see how do they show it a success when they cannot achieve the goals. These are two contradictory tasks, and I'm very curious on a personal level to see how will they wiggle out of this. But this does not diminish the main problem. We as a society, not only as power, but as a society at large, are failing to solve problems presented to us by a big war. We could not, and we still cannot. And unless there is a ceasefire and we have an option to take a breather and to conduct a systemic reboot of the whole project of Ukraine, not just powers, but the whole country. Okay, regardless, President Zelensky is still going to the United States where the elections are looming, and it's a very critical time there. The first debates happened, not clear if the next debates are going to happen. President Biden is finishing his presidential term. He'll never be a president again. And he probably has his own logic in this regard. What do you think he will never do in the remaining 2 months until elections? Regarding President Zelensky, war in Ukraine, our matters. Okay, Nikolai, for sure he will not want to win over Russia. He doesn't need victory over Russia. They need Russia as a neutral side in a conflict with China and as an ally in relation with India. between the West and Russia, there are very intensive consultations happening, and they actually have good understanding on the level of Cold War. They indeed are fighting on different platforms, different parts of the world, via different proxies. But in parallel, they definitely conduct communications and negotiations just like it was during the Cold War, and they continue regulating things on the key matters. So I don't know, our decolonizers, will they ever understand that nobody is fighting to the bitter end there? Neither NATO is going to destroy Russia, nor Russia wants to destroy everybody. But what we can see on the horizon, a big agreement between China, United States, Russia, and India. And it will end with a new Yalta and a collective agreement of security system for Europe, at least. And it will be successful, maybe in the world at large, what will help us to then avoid a World War III. Or perhaps we'll still go for the initial conflict or something in that regard, and then we'll get to that decision making. And if you were listening to us, I was suggesting to get on this path about a year ago already. Okay, regardless, these statements by Zelensky that he will insist that Biden invites Ukraine to NATO and there would be agreed a clear path forward for Ukraine to join EU as well. These look like big white elephants in the room that need to be addressed, and President Zelensky needs to be publicly or privately refused in his aspirations. Well, of course, we can say that according to one of the versions, President Zelensky is trying for Ukraine to win and for the bloody dictator Putin to lose. We understand that this is probably one of his goals. And I think there is a mixed goal in his visit. One of them is that desire to win and to prevail on the front. The second is to establish the responsible party for the losses and damages. What's missing, I think, in this is the real understanding of situation. Because, once again, in bold, biggest font letters, the West is not going for victory over Russia, for Russian defeat. Russia, they want to show Russia that it will be defeated, it will be suffering, if they will not be playing ball with the West. If they will not be playing as an ally against China and as a partner in relations with India. So this is the goal of the West. Of course, there is a hot war, there is a cold war happening on different fronts. But the West is always sending the message to Russia that if you will literally stop listening or stop being communicative or stop being reasonable, then yes, there will be some missiles falling on your heads. Because if Ukrainian UAVs reach your warehouses and airfields, imagine what will Tomahawks do. But this is only used as a threat. And Russians do understand their interests. So despite all the rhetoric that we will retaliate with our nukes and you will all regret this, that's not what they're really going for. And neither Russian propaganda nor Ukrainian propaganda is bringing the real picture to light of what's happening on the highest echelons of power. And I'm trying to explain that to people at large, to our listeners, what in reality is happening there. So, angry New York taxi drivers that I communicate with, they're saying that Russians are being very flexible. First of all, they are eager to stop the war because of a sum of different factors. The economy is not good, the population doesn't want to fight, they don't have enough money, and they understand that they're also in the active trade phase with the West, which is more interesting for them than holding another district of Ukraine. They're trading for much bigger influences and markets than that. And the main thing, I think, Russia achieved what they wanted to. This is not a land route to Crimea. That was not their main objective. Their main objective was to make the world multipolar. When the war started, it was not a multipolar world. They've solved the main task. They've enforced the West to understand that the world has multiple poles now. And there will be a new Yalta. This is their main result, new Yalta agreement. Now, again, they may not get everything that they want. They may get something, they may not get something else, they may get their asses handed to them somewhere. But they've solved the main task. This war was started by Putin not to capture Ukraine. This war was started by Putin mostly to show the West that, as a response to unwillingness of the West to build multipolar world with understanding and accepting some of the Russian interests in it, Russia is ready to use its armed forces as long and as much as needed for the West to start considering Russia as the main player and whose interests need to be considered. So, from the point of view of Russians in the global South, they're training the West off the neo-imperialism model. Because earlier they looked at all that as, oh, these are just some heathens. The West still treats this war as the war of two heathens, Ukraine and Russia. And they're still controlling this war, they're still regulating it by supplying or not supplying certain arms. This is an obvious fact, and as the Minister of Oil of India said, we will continue buying oil from Russia, because why? Europe continues to buy oil and gas from Russia, and they do, right? So they said then, all right. But Russia is well dressaged now, and they're slowly drifting to be either neutral or an ally of the West, and they can use it in relation to moderating to Iran, to moderate India relations, and to resist China. Everybody is happy. Now, a big question, what about us? And a simple question, what did Ukraine fight for? If at the negotiations table, we do not have a seat. They are listening to us in a friendly manner, but we don't have a seat there. And it's not because they are cunning, because we're weak in them. And now, from this perspective, look at the peace plan and the formula of that peace that Zelensky is bringing there. And you will suddenly see a positive impulse. It's a desire to topple the chessboard where everything is already pre-arranged and decided. And the idea is to make them listen to Ukraine. Problem is that the way it is formulated, the way it is written out, most likely it will not succeed. Therefore, we can applaud to the whole attempt to listen, to get everybody to listen to Ukraine with Kursk operation, with this peace proposal. But how we implement that, I don't think this will lead us to success. Our fundamental mistakes are still the same, narrow, nationalistic project instead of multinational and wider project, and a very faulty politics in relation to armed forces. This is just a catastrophe there. Now, if we manage to lift our economy up, if we reconfigure our military and we switch to a wider project, the motivation would have been different, the ability to defend the country would be different, and economic parameters and output would be different. And now we don't have any trump cards, because they can start asking, okay, let's look at every component that you're suggesting. How about 100,000 deserters? How about a collapsing front? Do you manufacture anything for your military? What are you going after? Alexey, our economist, whom I do advise our listeners to look up, he did publish that in the project of a budget for the next year, we don't have enough money for defense. He does a brilliant analysis there, and he's explaining that in the previous years of war, the budget was split like this. All of our money was sent to fight, to defense articles, and everything coming from the West was coming to support our social and economy and other payments. And for the next year, we're 10% less for the military monies. So that already starts a trend that we're already not pulling through. Situation in Russia is not much better. Both sides are tired and they want to strike peace at large. But Russia achieved what they wanted from the West. The West has almost achieved what they wanted from Russia, and Ukraine is attempting to acquire some political weight and get what we want by creating some random political operations and effects. Unfortunately, it's not well coordinated, and the contents of our actions are somewhat not successful, not well based or well founded. So this is my resume. All right, formally, we have a reaction of Kremlin that is ready to study Zelensky plan, but there is one condition spoken about by Peskov, speaker for Russian president. Peskov is saying that Kremlin may agree to study Zelensky's plan to finish this war. For that, there is one condition that needs to happen, is that this plan needs to be published in the official media. Peskov did not qualify what he considers to be official media, but according to his words, what they're seeing in different media, it is treated with caution in Moscow, because they cannot be sure that these are real points of Zelensky's plan. So this is Russian reaction on the eve of Zelensky's visit to Washington, that Kremlin actually is evaluating different options. Nikolai, the actual message there is to give a real judgment to Zelensky's plan. And despite of all I said before, I'm still drafting the overall perspective that right now we're still going through the stage of trade. And Russia is pointing its ears towards Zelensky's meeting with Washington to hear what parts of his plan are to be listened to. And Russia is still being threatened with long-range missiles, and Russia is still responding back that they will continue fighting regardless, even if you blow up all of their airfields and ammo dumps. But these are the extremes which both sides use to negotiate, but they're still negotiating. And also the fact that Putin is a lawyer, ultimately. He is training his country in the last, 20 plus years that he is in power to look at the documents, and that's the message from him, that we're not going to read to whatever Telegram channels are publishing. We need the official statement, and then we can discuss. Even though his Maria Zakharova already came out and sent a message that Russia will never agree and will never surrender and all, but perhaps she was not either invited to that meeting or had slept through it, or, well, yeah, she needed to say something, right? Yeah, it was probably ill-prepared speech. Meantime, Ukraine allowed for transit of Russian oil to Hungary. This was published by Ukrainian News. Let me see, Ukrainian National News. It's a government media source. People's Deputy also published the answer to their inquiry from Ariev, and they published that Ukraine indeed extended the agreement to transit oil to Hungary from Russia. So, do you think this is a part of us participating in these negotiations? Well, Nikolai, that is called a mortal combat with the eternal enemy with a lunch break. Because, of course, the war is horrible and it is genocide, and Russia is threatening to kill everybody. But first of all participants are really concerned about oil and gas pipes. And as we see, Russian gas goes to Hungary and then magically becomes Hungarian gas for Europe, which of course is not a Hungarian gas, it's just rebranded Russian gas and Russian oil. So this is a key interest of one of the NATO countries, of Hungary. That's why there was a series of meetings between our political leadership and Hungarian, where they've traded some conditions for continuous supply of oil to Hungary. And to remind our listeners that oil refining is an important economic factor for Hungary for the last 20 years at least, and Orban and his party are active stakeholders of this process. Because even in the European Union, they have issues with Hungarian oil refined products because they allow Hungary to make more money. They are very cheap, and they also push other manufacturers off the market, so they're quoting Hungary and limiting how much supply can they bring to the European market. So I think the negotiation on that has concluded. I hope we exchange that for something reasonable. And by the way, Russian bombs that are falling at our maternity wards, at our hospitals, at our kindergartens, somehow they are not falling on the gas pipes or oil pipes, right? So when people are saying that Putin is an insane maniac, he is not. He is very rational. This war is very well calculated, and it is an instrument of politics, and it's not the historical last battle, a thing of legends. And propagandists on both sides, on Russia and Ukraine, they are funny and puny, and they misunderstand the actual reasons of this war. problem is that our society is failing to address it as the rational, logical activity, at least on the mind level. I'm sorry for touching the mic. Okay. No, we can hear you fine. Right. All right. So another important publication made by Wall Street Journal right before the visit of President Zelensky to United States. According to Wall Street Journal, Ukraine has lost 80,000 military dead and 200,000 were lost by Russia dead, and the number of wounded is aggregated to 400,000 on both sides. According to their calculations, the numbers of dead and wounded during this war had roughly reached about 1 million, and that's what the publication is about. Do you think this data is corresponding with reality? And how did Wall Street Journal acquire that data? Nikolai, I think we have a statement of our president who was commenting that and saying that, oh no, it's laughable, our losses are much lower, and that does not match. And here I'm being torn apart on Plato is my friend, but truth is more important. Because I do want to support our president in his visit to the West, and while he thinks that small losses are probably a factor for us getting better grounds, better results out of this visit, but personally I think our losses are probably double of what Wall Street Journal estimates on both sides. I think Wall Street Journal was caught by some information leak and misinformation, and perhaps was verifying that with the officially released death certificates, and those are not to be trusted. You can easily multiply those by 2. That's why I'm thinking both our and Russian side's losses are twice bigger, and the losses of, by the way, Donetsk and Lugansk, so-called republics, 150,000, they are also not calculated. And how do we calculate them? These are our citizens who were enforced to fight for Russian army, and some of them were being literally forced to do that, while others, of course, are brainwashed enough to think that they're fighting against the evil Nazi Kyiv regime. I'm thinking this publication, Alexey, is probably done to support the visit of President Zelensky, and perhaps they're preparing the public opinion. That's what they're doing with this publication. Yeah, I'm sorry, Nikolai, but Dembo Meister erred and changed my life. He taught me that the truth is more important than government interests. If I was still in the office of the president, I could have probably wiggled out of this question or asked you to not ask it. But I'm a private citizen, and I can suspect, and I can afford myself to suspect that on the camera, that our losses and Russian losses are twice the numbers mentioned. All right, I want to go to review some other publications at large, especially what Mariana Bezuglaya was writing about our front, how it was crumbling since we left Avdiivka. And there was a big publication in Ukrainian Pravda about this. But before we go there, I want to say that let's mention that we are doing the fundraiser for Armed Forces of Ukraine. We're still gathering for 110th Brigade, right? Right, we are gathering for one of the best brigades, 110th, despite some of the nuances and recent things that came to media light. They have a very talented commander who made it one of the most effective brigades in Ukrainian military. Of course, he was recently removed, and now they have other command, but the guys are still talented and still carrying out the brunt of very difficult operations. And we already have, I think, only 90,000 hryvnias left on this fundraiser. We've done much more, so please, if you can, pitch a little bit. And after that, we have another brigade in line who's looking for vehicles. We used to close up to 150, 200,000 hryvnias in one stream, so it's only 90 left. Let's support them. And again, to remind our viewers that these money go directly to the account of these units. We only provide media support. We did not touch this money. Now, about the front line. There was a big publication in Ukrainian Pravda, unexpectedly detailed and rich in facts. And a lot of our suppositions and things that we've discussed in these streams are supported, proved right in it. For example, how the brigades were crumbling during rotation. I noted this story for myself. It's a long text, you probably have read it in full, but the story how Russia moved by 30 kilometers near Avdiivka over the last year, having almost reached one of the main strategic townships of Pokrovsk in Donbass, and the question whether it can be prevented with certain conclusions. What I paid attention to in this article, and here are some quotes about Russians using times of rotation, as Ukrainian Pravda was told by one of the drone operators. They were telling that the 68th Brigade didn't even have time to get to their positions fully during rotation. The guys who just were coming to their positions, they had to leave them almost immediately because they were being destroyed by FPV drones of Russians. Because the brigade, when they're leaving, they're picking up all the radio electronic interference devices with them. And the occupants, they catch this moment when there's no radio cover, no interference cover, and they can use their FPV drones to attack newly arriving detachments. Right, this is the price of us lacking the higher level of command on the operative and tactical levels. Let me tell you an interesting story. Sure. Once in Israel, I talked with Colonel of Israeli Armed Forces who, back in the first Lebanon War, 1982, now we're facing the third one, right? He was the officer of the operative department on the western direction. Israel entered Lebanon in 3 routes: the left, the western, and the central. They were fighting with Palestinian terrorists, and the right flank was facing regular Syrian army. And he asked me a question. He said that there is a General Yashkin, who was the main military advisor from Soviet Union in Syria, who wrote a book how they were destroying Israeli forces and destroying their jets and by hundreds and tanks. And the book was utterly propagandist. But he was saying that the fellow was a brilliant military expert, however, and this is the estimation of the officer who was fighting against him. What he said is that Yashkin, in very short terms, had elevated the level of Syrian army, operative level specifically. Understandably, you cannot retrain soldiers quickly, but on the operative command level, he was very effective. And one of the most brilliant points that he remembered is that they rotated at night. They rotated their detachments at night when the one was worn out and they need to replace it. That was the time when Sultan Yaqub happened. Israeli remember this story. One Israeli battalion, partly because Syrian side was acting rather professionally, and because they made some mistakes, they went deeper than they were supposed to into the territory occupied by Syrian troops. They got hit. They lost some people. 4 tankers were left on the battleground. And Russia, when they were rebuilding their relations with Israel, I think back in 2019, Putin returned the bodies of those tankers to Netanyahu. And this is the story known by Israel. So this officer was talking about that with about the night rotations with high praise, and he was saying that this is a sign of very well-trained operative command. And we should notice that Syrian troops were rotating, facing a much stronger adversary than we're facing in terms of Russians at that line. Proportionally, there were more Israelis. And Syrian troops, they were basically trained peasants. And the enemy, yet they were rather successful. And our enemies continue to catch us on our rotation. What tells us? What does it tell us about Yashkin and his skills and our current commanders who are doing our rotations? And that's an unexpected connection between Arab-Israel war and Russian-Ukraine war. Unfortunately, we are not successful enough here in these rotations. This experience is worth its weight in gold. Operative success, operative experience is the most difficult to gain and the easiest to lose. And until we get the higher level of command in our military, such as army corps and divisions, nothing will be happening. And even if we make them today, it'll take them a year and a half to acquire some experience. But perhaps, even though this war will be over by that time, they might acquire experience for the next war, to prevent it, or to be more effective. That's why I'm a bit tired to continue repeating the same mantra over and over again, hoping that maybe eventually in the brains of our powers and people of Ukraine, that maybe historians, if our society fails, that there was a person who was actually showing the right perspectives and highlighting the real problems, was explaining the forks of options, was explaining the laws of how to treat certain political moves, and was resisting propaganda that was blatantly popular at that time. And this is my natural teacher's position. All right, yeah, I understand all that, Alexey, about the operative level, about aggregating that valuable experience, about people who have it. It is strange for me that people are not making conclusions. I hope they have some rationale why they're not doing it. But I'm not getting another thing. If it is obvious that FPV drones are flying, they're there over the front line, right? They're always on reconnaissance missions. So operative intel at the spots is done by drones, right? They are also used to drop bombs, smaller size grenades on the heads of the troops. So I don't want to use incorrect words here, but it seems strange for me to make a decision about rotation without taking into consideration these simple factors. Because during Lebanon war, at least they did not have drones, right? But then still, understanding that there is a pause in ability to defend their positions during rotation, they still made decisions to remedy that. Why are we not doing it? I'll tell you another story, Nikolai. On Svetladar Duga, Svetladar Curve, a 72nd Brigade was replacing another one. I was a young captain of 40 years, and I was hoping of the Intel service, and I was hoping to drive across the front line to see what's up. This is a standard procedure. Intel service, Intel group needs to know details of positions down to the machine gunner, and you need to be able to show it on the map. You need to also judge the heights, the moods of your fighters, and how good fortifications are. The head of the Intel was very cowardly, and he was preventing me from doing work, but I snuck out a few times. So on the third day, in my third day in this brigade, I'm arriving to a position that is closer to the front, to the right flank, and I'm seeing a fortification dugout. And first thing I notice is, there are certain places where they attach a phone cable, right? You affix it to the walls of the dugout and the trench. And I see that the cable was torn out, and the brigade that was leaving, they took everything, the cable, even the plastic covers and everything. At the same time, in the corner, there is about 140 shots for the RPG, 7V modification. So I'm looking at that thinking, well, that's a great thing. All the caps are on, there's ammo is new, and I'm reporting to brigade commander, friend of mine, saying, hey, listen, dear colonel, there is some stuff we can take from this one. So we got 140 shots. But here's a question. Why one of the brigades, by the way, they're fighting well today too, they took plastic covers, they took wires, they took even nails and everything they could, but they left 140 shots. What do you think? Well, Alexey, I think because the shots are provided by the government. Exactly, Nikolai. Because you get the ammo from government, and the rest you have to beg for from volunteers or sponsors or find any other ways. And we are failing to solve this problem since 2014. Same thing, we are failing in figuring out the rotation issue, because brigades are taking everything. They're taking planks and plastic and nails and hammers and everything, and the new brigade will have to think on their own. And the fact that military command is failing to see a problem in this problem is 10 years old. This tells a lot about the military organization in Ukraine. Frankly, I don't even know if I want to quote anything else from this article, because it's all about the same, right? Yeah, exactly. I'll be repeating the same things. Lady, military journalist, Despite her being a lady, she actually figured all the details and understood the situation. Olga, and her last name starts with K. I do not really like Ukraine Pravda and the people working there, but I have to give dues to that lady. Maybe not even people working there, but the politics of the publication. But this correspondent did a very honest work and very correctly highlighted the reasons and issues that we're facing. I recommend our listeners to find it. And they gathered all the reasons that we discussed here with a very basic if-thens, and the main power on the ground is the power of consequences. Right, her name is Olga Kirilenko. Kirilenko, right. So she very correctly highlights all the problems that we are facing. They're typical for all military organizations in Ukraine. All right, a couple more quotes. Joint fortification was not very well thought out. You did speak about that, but she does write an interesting element. Probably for the first time in 2.5 years of this war, talking to military on Pokrovsk direction, they heard that they've dug a lot of trenches there, and in that direction there were positions for machine gunners and trenches, but there's a nuance that a lot of them are not suitable for real defense. Very often they're located in the middle of the field that are very visible for the enemy and make it almost impossible to provide any logistics to the fighters if they occupy it. And in one of the Pokrovsk directions, they have about several hundred yards of trenches in the middle of the field that are impossibly to supply logistically. And the tank trenches are dug in a different direction. They're dug in perpendicular way to these defense positions, so they actually help the enemy to get under cover to almost the trench itself. It's hard for me to imagine. This is like a nightmare scenario, right? But the military and the journalists are supporting that this is exactly how it is being done. So in my view, this is, and I don't want to be incorrect here, but this is at least strange, Alexey, to dig a ton of trenches, to spend money, equipment, effort, labor, and do not communicate with brigades who are going to be using them. Where would be the best place to put it? Where would they want their defense positions to be? How can you explain without using expletives? Well, military have to fight, and those who dig, they make money. These are two very independent processes, but they will earn money anyway, because they could have dug better. Yes, but they don't want to let military too close to what they're doing. What if they notice that they're digging in the wrong place, using wrong materials? Military should be fighting. That's why military end up taking shovels and digging in a separate location away from all these fantastic fortifications. And according to this article, part of these trenches were dug in perpendicular fashion to the tank trenches. So they essentially dug ravines that the enemy used to get to our positions much easier. Listen, we don't have a single person making decisions about the quality of our fortifications. We should have some military in the general command, some general on this position, but then military will likely be making money, or this money flows will be going through general command, not through the contractors, not through the government, not through the civilian part of the government. The moment that happens, the civilian part of the government will be very upset. That's why we have what we have. They control digging, but they do it however they like, because they don't invite any military to help them. You know, Comrade Stalin, not to mention his name in the evening, he understood a bit about management, because he was one of the more successful revolutionaries in Tbilisi who was stealing money from the bank carriages. And why he was loved by Vladimir Lenin, because he was the one who was actually acquiring money for the revolutionaries while everybody else was just talking. And he was also studying in the church school in seminary. And, you know, you get that from Bible, that there is one leader and everybody else listens to it. That's when you get results. And when everybody and their brother are digging the trenches and the main expert is not even let anywhere close to it, no commissions, no engineers, nobody to verify. And then several other diggers are actually getting a lot of money for that, as long as military do not see. Then we have what we have. So see, we have a problem. When we were not digging, we had problems. Now we started digging, we have bigger problems. We spent money and it only made it worse because the enemy is using what we have dug to progress on this front. This is what people, when they accuse us of accusing everything and criticizing everything, well, here's the logic of what's happening. We're talking about actual things. Look at the logic, look at the fortifications, and please tell us, where are we wrong? And the next iteration, I think, Alexey, would be to, again, refuse from digging, because when we were not digging, it was slightly better, right? When we were not digging, we were not at least spending money and resources. And yeah, it was more difficult for the enemy to advance, right? Exactly. They did not have handmade ravines to approach. Jesus. Okay. With all that, one can say that perhaps somebody is inventing the facts, but Mariana Bezuglaya, who, one way or another, it is difficult to accuse her of having no relation to power, she went generally to the same area, and she was telling what we do have, what we don't have. And she's saying that there is indeed a break between the Kievan military general command and the field. In her eyes, there definitely is a disconnect. And now near Pokrovsk agglomeration, they are building new fortifications, but these fortifications are not connected to general command orders. This is the product of horizontal coordination of local administration and military detachments fighting for this region, and they are involving engineers available and resources and sponsors available to them, and they're not listening to the outdated and having little relation to reality orders from the central command. Before they were afraid to do that, now they basically said to heck with it, and they're starting to build their own. And they're seeing that Kyiv doesn't see what reality is. And that's Mariana's conclusion about it. So it does tell me that we can fight successfully without general command. Is that so? I should remind the words of soldier Schweik, who said in a famous literature that the war started fantastically well, but then general command joined the fight. General command can be different. Some of them, when they have good command system, which is always a complex thing, they work. General command, as any general command, is a brain of the army, and the army fights as well as its brain thinks. In our case, everything is upside down or inverted. The brains are at the bottom, and up above we have a breakage of nervous system because general command manages troops so well that troops have to lie to them. And without getting real information, you cannot draw real worthy commands down. So one causes the other, and that's why something needs to be done with the military fundamentally. This army is not good even for peace times, not even talking about heroic victories during the war. Again, put everything on pause, ceasefire, negotiations, and do a radical change of our military system. This is our only chance. If we continue fighting, the front will collapse. Whether we have long-range missiles or we don't have long-range missiles, we will still be crumbling. And today we had a Russian gliding bomb hitting Zaporozhye, first time. Dnieper will be facing that same threat soon again, if it will continue. Guys, we need to acknowledge that as a society, we cannot summarily, in the current circumstances, to solve this problem during war. We just can't. We've been breaking everything apart for 33 years, and the hopes that in 2.5 years we will change everything. And it's not even about fortifications, it's not about changing the military leadership, it's about the whole government, the whole societal structure. We don't want to, apparently, and we can't. If we wanted to, we would have, but we are looking at the real results and we're not there. That's why I would say, again, our task is to stop this war and use the time of peace to conduct drastic reboot of our society. A year ago, I was called a spy for these words. Today we have a president who is talking about peace formula and how we're doing that, and everybody is talking about peace. And now, my question to those who accuse me, are you ashamed, guys, who are telling stories that I'm a spy? I understand that you'll still keep me as a spy, but those of you who are doing that, you'll be probably showing how you'll be winning in this war and how you'll be rebuilding our society. And I'll be curious to observe it. And let's finish today's stream with some good achievements. We do have some good achievements this week. We have hit 2 major warehouses with munitions in Russia. And this is a serious, serious success. Here we need to be praising our troops who have done that. This is a brilliant story. 750,000 shells blown up. This is for 2 to 3 months of war, key months, when now we are facing the battle in front of negotiations and elections in America. This is a serious achievement, and one needs to take a hat off and congratulate those who have done it. This is brilliant. The commentator is saying this will be reflected on the battlefront. Absolutely, Nikolai. The intensity of artillery strikes is already going down. They're running into a deficit of ammo, and we're already seeing that, according to the intel that's coming, that they're running short in artillery supplies on several of the key directions. And this is a serious achievement. We're trying to be honest here. When things fail, we talk about that. When we succeed, we praise that. End of hour 1.